The night was thick with fog, casting an eerie silence over the small town as Jake drove home from work. The clock on his dashboard ticked past midnight, and the dim headlights of his car barely penetrated the swirling mist. As he turned onto a quiet side street, he noticed two children standing at the end of the road, their figures barely illuminated. Confusion washed over him. What were kids doing out here at this hour? He slowed down, squinting to get a better look. They seemed to be around 10 years old, dressed in mismatched clothing, with pale skin and unnaturally dark hair that framed their faces. But it was their eyes that sent a chill down his spine, solid black, devoid of any white or iris, just endless voids staring back at him. As he approached, the children stepped forward, moving almost in unison. One of them raised a hand, signaling him to stop. The girl spoke first, her voice soft yet commanding, asking if they could get a ride home. There was something unsettling about her tone, a strange familiarity that felt deeply invasive. Jake hesitated, looking at the rearview mirror, but there was no one else on the road, just the two children, who now seemed closer, their expressions unnaturally calm, almost serene. "Please," the boy said, his voice echoing in the stillness, "we just want to go home." Jake's instinct screamed at him to drive away, but he felt an odd compulsion to hear them out. He rolled down the window a crack, just enough to talk. "Where do you live?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The girl pointed down the road, but her finger trembled slightly. "Just a few blocks away," she said, her eyes locked onto his with an intensity that felt like a spell. The boy leaned closer, and Jake could see the strange, almost magnetic pull of their presence. It was as if the children were drawing him in, luring him with promises of safety and comfort. "We're cold," the boy added, and suddenly the temperature inside the car dropped, the air thickening with an unshakable dread. Jake felt his heart race, battling between curiosity and terror. "I can't," he finally replied, feeling foolish as he said it. "It's too late, and I really need to get home." A flicker of something crossed their faces. Disappointment? Anger? He couldn't tell. The children stepped back slightly, but their expressions shifted to something darker. "You don't have to be afraid of us," the girl said, but there was a dissonance in her voice, as if she were reciting lines from a script. "We just want to come in. We promise we won't hurt you." The boy added, "Let us in, and everything will be okay." Jake's instincts flared to life, and he felt a primal urge to flee. In that moment, he realized that they weren't just strange children, they were something else entirely. As he hit the gas, the car lunged forward, tires screeching against the asphalt, leaving the black-eyed children behind. Glancing in the rearview mirror, Jake caught a glimpse of them standing still in the fog, their dark eyes boring into him, as if they were etching their presence into his mind. Panic surged through him, and he drove faster, adrenaline pumping. The image of those void-like eyes seared into his memory. The sensation of being watched persisted, a heavy weight pressing down on him even after he turned onto the main road, his heart racing as he finally pulled into the safety of his driveway. As he stepped out of the car, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. The silence around him felt suffocating, and he glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see the children standing there, waiting. He hurried inside, locking the door behind him, breathing heavily. Hours later, unable to sleep, he found himself staring at the walls of his darkened living room. Every creak of the house echoed like a warning, and he kept replaying the encounter in his mind. Were they real? Had he imagined it? But deep down, he knew the truth. The fear lingered, settling into the corners of his thoughts. Each time a car passed by outside, his heart leapt. The children were still out there, waiting for him to let them in, to give in to their haunting invitation. And as the shadows deepened around him, Jake couldn't help but wonder, what would have happened if he had opened that door? The clock ticked steadily, the sound a metronome of anxiety as Jake shifted on the couch, unable to shake the chill of that night. Each creak of the floorboards above him felt like a whisper from the darkness, urging him to remember. He replayed the encounter over and over, unable to comprehend what he had seen. The black-eyed children lingered in his mind, their expressions frozen in a mix of innocence and malice. He pulled his phone from his pocket, but when he searched online for reports of missing children or strange sightings, nothing surfaced. Just the quiet hum of the digital world, devoid of any mention of the two figures that had haunted him. As the hours dragged on, he felt a weight pressing on his chest, suffocating yet familiar. The shadows seemed to deepen in the corners of the room, elongating and twisting as if reaching for him. The night outside was still thick with fog, and he imagined those children standing just beyond the reach of the streetlights, waiting patiently. What if they were still out there? What if they were watching him right now, hidden among the shadows? The thought sent a shudder through him. and he rushed to the window, pulling aside the curtain. The street was empty, but his heart raced as he peered into the darkness, searching for any sign of movement. Every sound became amplified, the rustle of leaves outside like a warning. He recalled their voices, eerily calm and persuasive, begging to be let in. What could they want? He felt an unsettling realization creeping in. They had wanted something more than just a ride home. He sank back onto the couch, rubbing his temples in frustration. He needed to distract himself, to break free from the haunting memories. Reaching for the remote, he turned on the television, but the flickering screen only reminded him of the shadows lurking in the corners of his home. The night dragged on, and the fear continued to spiral within him. As dawn approached, the pale light filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows that danced across the room. Just as he thought he might finally drift off, a sharp knock echoed through the stillness. It was loud and insistent, rattling the doorframe and sending his heart racing anew. He froze, the sound reverberating in his chest. Who could it be at this hour? Fear coursed through him, and he felt paralyzed, caught between the instinct to hide and the need to investigate. Gathering his courage, he approached the door, each step heavy with dread. He peeked through the peephole, his breath caught in his throat. The corridor outside was empty, yet the sense of being watched was overpowering. He turned back, heart pounding, and began to wonder if he was losing his grip on reality. Had the children followed him? Were they waiting for him to make a mistake? He took a step back, leaning against the wall, the faint light of dawn now casting a ghostly glow across the room. Moments later, his phone buzzed on the table, jolting him from his thoughts. It was a text from his friend Mark, checking in on him after hearing about the strange happenings around town. "You okay, man? Heard about those weird kids people are seeing." The words sent a fresh wave of panic through Jake. How could Mark know about the children? He typed back hastily, asking for more information. As he waited for a response, he glanced out the window again, and his breath caught in his throat. There they were, standing at the edge of his yard, the same children he had encountered the night before. They were eerily still, black eyes reflecting the first light of dawn like two dark holes. The girl raised her hand, her expression unreadable. It was as if they had been waiting for him, patient and unwavering. Jake's heart raced, his instincts screaming at him to run, but his feet felt glued to the floor. He was caught in their gaze, unable to look away. His phone buzzed again, pulling him from the trance. Mark's message read, "People are saying they have this weird effect on you. Don't let them in." The urgency in his friend's words sent adrenaline coursing through him. He had to act fast. Jake stumbled backward, grabbing the nearest object, a heavy lamp, preparing to defend himself if necessary. As he moved away from the window, he heard soft, melodic voices drifting through the air, calling to him in a sing-song manner. "Let us in, Jake. We're just children. We're cold." Terror consumed him, and he glanced back at the door, memories flooding his mind, their eyes, their pleading voices. He couldn't let them in, no matter how much they tried to charm him. Taking a deep breath, he turned away from the door, retreating to the farthest corner of the living room. He needed to find a way to protect himself, to escape this nightmare. The voices outside grew more insistent, a cacophony of whispers that seeped through the walls, wrapping around him like a suffocating fog. As the minutes dragged on, the fog outside seemed to thicken, coiling around the house like a serpent. Jake felt the weight of the atmosphere closing in, pressing against his chest. He picked up his phone again, trying to call Mark, but the call wouldn't connect. Panic surged as he realized he was cut off, isolated in this house filled with creeping shadows. The children were still there, their presence palpable even through the walls, and he could hear their soft laughter mingling with the sound of his own heartbeat. Desperation clawed at him. He rummaged through drawers, searching for anything that could provide protection, a baseball bat, a knife, anything. As he searched, he felt the air grow heavier, thickening with an unspoken threat. Suddenly, a loud bang reverberated through the house, echoing like thunder. He froze, heart racing, the sound coming from the back door. They were trying to get in. Adrenaline surged, and he moved instinctively toward the noise, clutching a kitchen knife tightly. Jake reached the back door, breathless and terrified. The handle rattled violently as if someone were trying to force it open. "Jake," came the girl's voice, sweet and innocent yet laced with an undercurrent of something sinister. "Let us in. We just want to be friends." The boy joined in, his tone pleading. "Please, we're scared out here." The combination of fear and confusion spiraled in Jake's chest. He couldn't understand why they were doing this, what they wanted from him. As he gathered his resolve, he glanced out of the small window beside the door. and the sight sent a jolt of ice through his veins. The children stood close, eyes wide and unblinking, expressions shifting from innocence to something predatory. "You don't need to be afraid, Jake. We just want to come in." Their voices became a haunting melody, a chorus of manipulation that made his skin crawl. He couldn't let them in. With a sudden burst of determination, he turned away from the door and ran back into the house, slamming the kitchen door shut behind him. In that moment of escape, he felt a flicker of hope, but it quickly faded as he heard the soft tapping at the windows, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. "Let us in, Jake. We promise it'll be okay." He gripped the knife tighter, backing into a corner, every shadow now a threat, every noise a reminder of the children's presence. The day grew brighter outside, but within the walls of his home, darkness reigned. Hours passed, or maybe only minutes' time felt meaningless. Jake's heart thudded like a drum, every sound amplifying his fear. He knew he couldn't stay trapped here forever. There had to be a way out. The front door offered a possible escape, but he feared what lay beyond it. Summoning every ounce of courage, he decided he had to try. As he approached the front door, the tapping grew louder, an urgent symphony that echoed in his ears. He reached for the doorknob, hesitating for a heartbeat, but steeling himself, he threw open the door. The fog had lifted slightly, but the children stood just beyond the threshold, eyes still void and watching. "You shouldn't have opened the door, Jake," the girl said, her voice almost melodic. "Now you're part of our game." With terror coursing through him, he stepped back, feeling the familiar weight of dread settle back in his chest. He glanced around, searching for a way to escape, but their presence felt all-consuming, and in that moment he understood he was trapped in a nightmare of his own making, and the black-eyed children were the gatekeepers. As they stepped forward, he knew there would be no escape, and the walls of his reality closed in around him, plunging him into darkness once more. Jake stumbled back, his mind racing as the children moved closer, their features sharpened by the dim light of dawn. The air felt electric, thick with an unspeakable dread. He pressed his back against the wall, the cool surface grounding him, but his heart thudded like a drum in his chest. "What do you want?" he managed to choke out, his voice trembling. The girl tilted her head, a smile creeping onto her lips that seemed more sinister than innocent. "We just want to play," she replied, her tone sugary sweet yet laced with something darker. "It's more fun when you're scared." Jake's breath quickened. He turned his head to the side, searching for an escape route. He could bolt for the back door, but the thought of turning his back on them made his skin crawl. "You're not real," he whispered to himself, grasping the knife tighter, feeling its cold weight anchor him in the madness. But even as he said it, the eerie reality of their presence pressed down on him like a vice. With a sudden, chilling synchronicity, the children took another step forward, their eyes gleaming with a predatory hunger that sent a jolt of terror through him. "You can't run away, Jake," the boy said, his voice echoing in the stillness like a chant. "You let us in when you saw us. You let us into your mind." The realization hit him like a wave. This wasn't just about being physically trapped. They had invaded his thoughts, feeding on his fear, growing stronger with each passing moment. Frantically, he glanced around, desperate for anything that could help him. His gaze fell on a stack of old books piled haphazardly in the corner, their spines cracked and faded. One in particular caught his eye, a thick tome on folklore and urban legends. Maybe there was something in it that could help him understand the nature of these beings, maybe even a way to banish them. "You can't do this," Jake shouted, finding a flicker of defiance amidst the terror. "You're just children." But the children only laughed, a sound that twisted in his stomach. "We're not just children, Jake. We are what lurks in the dark. We are shadows of your fear." The girl took another step forward, and Jake felt the walls closing in around him, the shadows stretching and warping as if alive. He could almost feel their icy breath against his skin. "You invited us in when you hesitated. You're part of our world now." Jake's pulse raced, and with a sudden burst of desperation, he darted toward the bookcase. He grabbed the folklore book and flipped it open, pages fluttering wildly as he searched for anything that could provide insight. As he read, the children's laughter grew louder, mocking his efforts, each peal a dagger of fear that pierced through him. "You can't read your way out of this," the boy sneered, stepping closer still, their black eyes glimmering with malevolent delight. His fingers raced over the words, and just as he found a passage about protective charms and wards, the lights flickered ominously. A cold draft swept through the room, extinguishing the warmth of the dawn. "We'll play a game," the girl suggested, her voice a soft, haunting melody that slithered into his ears. "If you win, we'll leave you alone. If you lose," she trailed off, letting the unspoken threat hang in the air like a noose. "What kind of game?" Jake demanded, desperation sharpening his voice. "I'm not afraid of you." "Oh, but you are," the boy replied, eyes glinting. "You just don't know it yet." The shadows thickened, wrapping around him like smoke, and he could feel the room spinning, the boundaries of reality warping and bending. "It's a simple game," the girl continued, her tone syrupy sweet. "You have to find the truth before the darkness takes you." The air crackled with tension as they gestured toward the book. "That book holds secrets, Jake, secrets about us." With a sudden, swift movement, they lunged forward, reaching for him. In a panic, he swung the book like a shield, and it connected with the boy's shoulder, sending him stumbling back. But the girl was relentless, her laughter turning shrill. "You can't escape us." Jake felt the room grow darker, the very walls seeming to breathe, in and out, pulsing with a sinister energy. He opened the book again, desperation driving him. His eyes scanned the lines, heart pounding as he searched for a way to turn the tide. The words seemed to shimmer in the dim light, and suddenly he found a passage about a protective incantation, a way to banish dark spirits that preyed on fear. "Get away from me!" he shouted, and with newfound resolve he began to recite the words aloud, his voice growing stronger with each syllable. The shadows recoiled, shrieking in frustration, but the children remained rooted, their expressions shifting to fury. "No, you can't!" they cried, the harmony of their voices cracking like glass. The air thickened, vibrating with energy, as Jake continued to chant, feeling a surge of power coursing through him. "By light and truth, I bind thee," he shouted, the room erupting in a blinding flash. For a moment he felt weightless, suspended between worlds as the darkness writhed around him. The children's laughter turned to wails of anger and despair as the shadows peeled away, revealing the first light of morning spilling through the windows. But just as he thought he had won, the boy lunged forward, fingers clawing at the air. "You can't get rid of us that easily," he screamed, and in that moment, Jake felt a pull, a gravity that threatened to drag him back into the darkness. "We'll always be with you, Jake. You've invited us into your heart." With a final shout, Jake poured every ounce of his will into the incantation. "Leave me, I command you." And in a flash of light, the room erupted, the children's forms disintegrating into nothingness, their screams echoing in his mind, fading to silence. As the brightness engulfed him, Jake collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath, the weight of the world crashing down around him. He had won, at least for now. But as he lay there, shaken and exhausted, he realized that the true horror wasn't just the encounter, it was the knowledge that the darkness lingered within him, waiting for another moment of fear, another moment of weakness to seep back in. The children were gone, but the fear remained, and Jake knew he would never truly escape the shadows that haunted his mind. The sun rose higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the room, but Jake's heart remained heavy. He had faced the darkness, but at what cost? And as the day wore on, the whispers of the children echoed in his ears, reminding him that they were always just a breath away, waiting for the chance to return. The battle may have been won, but the war was far from over. Jake lay on the floor, the remnants of the encounter swirling in his mind like the remnants of a nightmare he couldn't shake. He had fought back, but the echoes of their laughter still reverberated through his thoughts. As he pulled himself up, he felt an unsettling heaviness in the air, as if the room itself were holding its breath. The sunlight streaming in through the window felt insufficient, its warmth unable to penetrate the lingering chill that clung to him like a shroud. He staggered to his feet, his body trembling from the adrenaline crash, and instinctively glanced at the book he had used to repel the children. Its pages fluttered slightly, as if disturbed by an unseen wind, and he approached it cautiously, half expecting the children to leap out from its confines. He opened it, desperately searching for more information about what he had faced, hoping for some hint, some insight that could prepare him for whatever might deem. The pages contained tales of the black-eyed children beings that thrived on fear, drawing strength from the dread they instilled in their victims. One passage spoke of their insidious nature, how they could appear at any time, often when one was most vulnerable. "They are always hungry," the text warned. "The more fear you show, the stronger they become." A chill ran down his spine as he read those words. He had only glimpsed their true power. Just as he closed the book, the lights flickered again, and a cold gust of wind swept through the house, ruffling the curtains and sending a shiver down his spine. It felt as if the house itself were alive, resonating with the dark energy that had permeated it. He turned, his heart racing, the familiar feeling of dread creeping back in. Had he truly banished them, or were they merely lying in wait, biding their time. As the shadows in the room lengthened, he felt a pull, a compulsion to look outside. He stepped to the window and peered through the curtains, his breath hitching as he spotted them again standing at the edge of his yard, two dark figures shrouded in mist. Their eyes glinted like obsidian, locked onto him, drawing him into their depths. The girl raised her hand in that haunting gesture he remembered so vividly, and a sickening chill enveloped him. "We're still here, Jake," she sang, her voice lilting and unnervingly calm. "You can't escape us." He stumbled back, the reality of their presence crashing over him like a wave. Panic surged, and he grabbed his phone, desperately scrolling for any resources, any way to seek help. But the screen remained eerily blank, no service, no connection. "Of course," he muttered bitterly, "trapped again." He rushed to the front door, gripping the knob tightly, but hesitated. What if they were stronger now? What if opening the door would be the end of him? The laughter from outside grew louder, a mocking symphony that echoed through the silence of his home. "Let us in, Jake," the boy taunted. "We just want to play." A surge of anger flared within him, pushing aside his fear. "No," he shouted, his voice ringing through the house. "I won't let you in." He turned to the back door, intent on escaping, but the moment he reached for the handle, he froze. The room darkened, and a chilling whisper slithered through the air, wrapping around him. "You can't run from us. We'll always find you." Jake dashed to the kitchen, heart pounding. He grabbed the knife again, its weight comforting in his grip. He needed a plan, something to regain control. Flipping through the pages of the folklore book, he searched for anything that could help him ward off the dark presence lingering just outside. The children's laughter faded for a moment, replaced by a suffocating silence that felt even more ominous. Suddenly a loud crash jolted him from his thoughts, a window shattering in the back of the house. He spun around, adrenaline flooding his system as he gripped the knife tighter. The shadowy figures began to coalesce, slipping through the shards of glass, their forms distorting as they entered his home, eyes glowing like twin voids. "You invited us in, Jake," the girl cooed, her voice dripping with delight. "You can't take it back." "No," Jake shouted, lunging forward, knife poised to strike. The boy darted aside with unnatural speed, laughing as he did so. "You think that will stop us? We're already inside." The shadows danced around him, coiling and twisting, as if mocking his fear. Jake's heart raced as he realized he was surrounded. In that moment of sheer terror, he recalled an incantation from the book, a final, desperate measure that could potentially sever the connection between him and the children. "Get back," he yelled, voice trembling as he began to chant, recalling the words he had memorized. "By light and truth, I bind thee." The room erupted with a blinding light as the children shrieked in unison, their laughter turning to wails of fury. The shadows writhed, battling against the light that surged forth from him. "You can't do this," the girl screamed, her voice rising above the chaos. "You need us, Jake." "No," he shouted back, the light intensifying with every word he uttered. "I don't need you. I am not afraid." The air around him crackled, filled with raw energy, as the shadows began to unravel, dissipating like smoke in the wind. The children's forms twisted and contorted, their eyes wide with a mix of rage and desperation. Suddenly, with a final surge of energy, the light enveloped the room, and Jake felt a rush of warmth, pushing the darkness away. The children's forms faded, their cries echoing until they became mere whispers, swallowed by the light. But just as he thought he had triumphed, the boy's voice slithered into his mind, chilling him to the core. "You may have won this time, Jake, but remember, fear is a powerful thing. We'll always be waiting." As the light dimmed and the room settled back into silence, Jake collapsed to the floor, panting heavily. He had fought them off at least for now, but he felt the lingering weight of their presence, the knowledge that the battle was not truly over. The sun set that evening, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple, but the shadows inside him felt darker than ever. He pulled himself to his feet, determination igniting within him. He would not let them win. He would find a way to confront this fear, to banish the darkness once and for all. With a new resolve, he took the book and sat down at his kitchen table, preparing to dig deeper into the lore surrounding these malevolent entities. The whispers may linger, but he would not let them control him. As night fell and shadows stretched across the room, Jake steeled himself for the battle ahead, knowing that the war against the darkness within was just beginning. The kitchen was dimly lit, shadows creeping in like unwelcome guests. Jake sat at the table, the folklore book before him, its pages now feeling more like a map to a labyrinth of terror. His heart thudded, echoing in the silence, as he fought the creeping dread that threatened to engulf him once again. He flipped through the book with urgency, absorbing every detail about the black-eyed children and their malevolent nature. A passage caught his eye. Fear manifests in different forms. It can be a doorway to despair or a weapon against darkness. The words struck him like a bolt of lightning, igniting a spark of defiance. He felt the weight of their threat, their promise to return, but he also felt a flicker of hope. Suddenly, the lights flickered ominously, and the chill returned, wrapping around him like a vice. Jake's breath hitched as he felt their presence once more, an oppressive energy that filled the room. He stood up, fists clenched, determination coursing through him. He wouldn't let them take control again. "I won't let you win. You're nothing but shadows." The air thickened, and the laughter erupted, a cacophony of mockery that echoed around him. "You think you're brave, Jake?" the girl's voice teased, her figure forming out of the darkness, eyes glowing with malice. "Bravery without knowledge is just foolishness." Jake gritted his teeth, recalling the incantation he had uttered before. He reached for the salt he had scattered, reaffirming his protective barrier, but the shadows twisted, warping around the circle he had drawn. The boy appeared beside her, a sinister grin plastered on his face. "You can't keep us out forever. We're part of you now." With every ounce of strength, Jake pressed on, flipping to another page in the book that spoke of binding rituals. He grabbed a pen and began to draw a new symbol on the table, focusing on the shapes, the lines, and the words that would strengthen his resolve. "By the power of light and truth, I bind you." The shadows lunged, distorting around him, as if trying to drown out his voice. "You'll regret this, Jake. You'll pay for your defiance." Their voices melded into a chaotic harmony that filled his ears, drowning out rational thought. He raised his voice, drawing upon the remnants of his fear but channeling them into anger. "I am not afraid of you," he bellowed. The symbol beneath his hand began to glow, pulsing with energy. "You're nothing but a figment of my imagination." The room trembled as the shadows surged toward him, the darkness coiling and curling like a living thing. In that moment of chaos, he felt something shift inside him, an ember of strength igniting. He thought of the faces of those he loved, the memories that made him who he was. "You don't own me," he roared, completing the symbol. Light exploded from the sigil, illuminating the entire room. The children shrieked, their forms warping and distorting as the brightness engulfed them. "No, you can't do this," the girl cried, her voice shrill and filled with rage. Jake pressed forward, pouring every ounce of his will into the light. "I command you to leave." The shadows writhed and twisted, but the light pushed them back, forcing them toward the edges of the room. In that moment, the room filled with a blinding white, and he felt the energy coalescing around him, empowering him. He took a step forward, the light radiating from his body like a shield. "I bind you to this darkness." With a final, guttural scream, the light surged, and the children were swallowed into the blinding radiance, their forms flickering out of existence. The room fell silent, save for Jake's heavy breathing, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. But as the light began to fade, the boy's voice slithered into his mind once more, a whisper echoing in the silence. "You may have banished us, Jake, but fear is a parasite. It will always find a way back." Jake staggered back, feeling the weight of the warning settle deep within him. He had won a battle, but the war was far from over. He gripped the table, fighting to steady himself, the aftermath of the confrontation leaving him breathless. The kitchen was silent, but the shadows still lingered at the edges of his vision, a reminder of the darkness that lay just beyond the light. He knew he couldn't let his guard down. He needed to prepare for their inevitable return. "I will find a way to break this cycle. I won't be a prisoner of my own mind." With renewed resolve, he returned to the book, flipping through the pages, looking for any clues that could help him confront his fears. Each story felt like a warning, a glimpse into the abyss that was who let their guard down. Jake, scribbling notes furiously, piecing together rituals and protections from the book. The clock ticking, the shadows outside his window deepening as night fully enveloped the house. Close-ups of the pages, revealing symbols and incantations as he mutters them under his breath. As he delved deeper into the lore, Jake felt the familiar chill return, but this time he was ready. He gathered supplies, salt, herbs, candles, anything that could help him fortify his defenses. He set up a protective circle in the center of the kitchen, whispering the words of protection with fervor, grounding himself in the belief that he could conquer this fear. "I will not let them take me. I will be the light in this darkness." But as he prepared for the night ahead, a creeping doubt began to gnaw at him. What if the darkness he faced was not just external? What if it was a reflection of his own insecurities, his own nightmares come to life? The shadows flickered at the edge of his vision, growing bolder. "We're always watching, Jake," they whispered, echoing through the halls of his mind. "You can't escape us. We are your fears made flesh. No. You're just illusions." The children's laughter echoed in his ears, a mocking reminder that they were still very much a part of his reality, and as the darkness pressed closer, he steeled himself for the inevitable confrontation, knowing that this fight was not just for his survival. As night deepened, Jake sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by the remnants of his research-scattered pages, salt circles, and the folklore book that felt like a tether to an unseen realm. The air felt charged, thick with anticipation, and every creak of the house echoed in his ears, heightening his sense of dread. He flipped through the book again, scanning for anything he might have missed. His heart raced as he read of protective symbols, incantations, and wards meant to keep the dark at bay. The words danced before him, their meanings tangled in a web of fear and resolve. "I have to face this," he whispered to himself, grounding his thoughts. "I will not let them win." The lights flickered and he looked up, the darkness outside pressing against the windows like a living entity. Shadows stretched across the floor, twisting into grotesque shapes. Panic surged, but he pushed it down, reaching for the salt and beginning to trace a protective sigil on the floor, murmuring the incantation he'd learned. Suddenly, laughter erupted from outside, a chilling symphony that filled the silence of the night. "Let us in, Jake. We want to play." The voices of the black-eyed children taunted him, a mocking reminder of their power. Jake completed the sigil, stepping back as the symbols glowed faintly under the kitchen lights. "I bind you," he shouted, the words echoing in the stillness. "You will not enter this space." For a moment, the laughter faltered, replaced by a menacing silence. But then, like a tide, the shadows surged, coiling around the edges of the sigil. "Do you think those words can save you?" The boy's voice hissed, full of malice. "You're just delaying the inevitable." As the darkness thickened, Jake felt a familiar chill run down his spine. It was as if the shadows were reaching for him, seeking to unravel his resolve. "I won't let you take me," he cried, summoning every ounce of strength he had. He focused on the light within him, the warmth that had once pushed them back. In a desperate attempt, he raised the knife, the blade catching the weak light. "By the power of light and truth, I bind you to this darkness. I will not fear you." The shadows writhed, retreating slightly as he pressed forward, the knife acting as an anchor. He began to chant again, drawing on the incantation that felt more powerful now. "By this light, I command you leave this place." The room filled with a radiant glow, illuminating the darkness as the shadows twisted in agony. The children shrieked, their laughter turning into wails of fury. "You can't do this," the girl screamed, her voice rising above the chaos. "You need us." "No," Jake shouted back, pouring all his anger and defiance into his words. "I don't need you. You are nothing but fear." The shadows began to fracture, their forms breaking apart like glass under pressure. In that moment, he realized their power stemmed from his own fear, and he would not give them that satisfaction any longer. With a final, desperate cry, he thrust the knife into the air, channeling every bit of light he could muster. "I command you to leave this place." The light exploded, washing over everything, consuming the shadows entirely. The children's forms forked as they were swallowed by the brilliance, their voices fading into a haunting echo. "Remember, Jake," the boy's voice lingered, faint but filled with menace. "We'll always be waiting." Then, silence. The light dimmed, and Jake fell to his knees, panting heavily, feeling the remnants of their presence dissolve into nothingness. He had done it, he had banished them. At least for now. As he regained his breath, he looked around the room, the air now heavy with a palpable peace. The shadows had receded, but he knew they would return if he let fear creep back into his heart. Jake stood, gripping the knife tightly. "I'll be ready for you," he whispered, determination igniting within him. He gathered the remnants of the salt, the pages scattered across the table, and felt a sense of resolve wash over him. This was not the end, but rather a new beginning in his battle against the darkness. The days turned into weeks, and while Jake managed to push the black-eyed children from his immediate thoughts, their taunts lingered like ghosts in the back of his mind. Each night brought an unease he couldn't shake, the shadows at the corners of his room reminding him of the battle that had unfolded. He immersed himself in research, devouring every piece of folklore and myth he could find about the children and their kind. He created protective wards throughout his home, each one a declaration of his defiance against the darkness that sought to engulf him. The folklore book became his constant companion, its pages worn from frequent readings. But with each ward he placed, a part of him felt like he was sealing himself away, locking out not only the shadows but also the warmth of life. Friends reached out, concerned about his sudden isolation, but he brushed them off, insisting he needed to focus on personal projects. In truth, he feared what would happen if he let his guard down. One evening, as he sat in the living room, he felt the weight of the silence around him. The walls felt closer, and the shadows seemed to pulse with a life of their own. He glanced toward the window, where darkness pooled outside, a vast ocean of uncertainty. "What do you want from me?" he whispered into the quiet, his voice trembling. "Why can't you just leave me alone?" For a moment the house felt still, as if holding its breath. Then, a soft breeze stirred the air, and he could almost hear the faint echoes of laughter on the wind. "We just want to play, Jake," the girl's voice called, a distant, haunting melody that made his skin crawl. Jake stood, heart pounding, and approached the window. He pressed his palms against the cool glass, staring into the abyss of the night. "You don't own me. I faced you before, and I will again." But deep down, he felt the tremors of fear rise again, the fear that they would return stronger, that he would be unable to withstand the tide of darkness that threatened to drown him. In that moment he made a choice. He would not let them control his life any longer. He grabbed the folklore book, flipping through the pages until he found a new ritual. He had yet to try one that promised to strengthen the barriers between the barras. With renewed determination he set to work, gathering the materials he would need, herbs, candles, salt. As he prepared the ritual, he felt a flicker of hope igniting within him, dispelling the lingering shadows of doubt. He would confront this fear head-on. As the candles flickered, illuminating the space around him, he whispered the incantations, feeling the energy shift in the room. The shadows trembled, but he held firm, standing against the tide. "You will not take me again." With each word he spoke, he felt the warmth of the light within him grow. The shadows recoiled, their laughter dimming into silence, and for the first time in weeks Jake felt a sense of peace wash over him.